The twin moons of Xerion hung like bleeding eyes in the amber sky, casting their crimson light across the crystalline forests where the Eldri made their home. Lyralii pressed her palm against the smooth bark of a singing tree, feeling the harmonic vibrations that had guided her people for 3 millennia. The ancient grove hummed with bioluminescent energy, its crystal branches refracting the morning light into prismatic rainbows that danced across her silver skin. But today, the songs were discordant. "Commander," whispered Theron, materializing from behind a cluster of resonance crystals that grew like frozen music from the forest floor. His emerald eyes reflected the same concern that nodded in Lyralii's chest. "The seismic sensors detect massive movement in the scorched territories. The Krothak are mobilizing." Lyralii's hand moved instinctively to the plasma rifle at her hip, its bioorganic components grown from the same living technology that powered their civilization. The weapon pulsed with a soft blue light, responding to her emotional state. 3,000 years of peace, broken by the very species they had tried so hard to understand. "How many?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Orbital reconnaissance suggests, all of them." Theron's voice carried the weight of impending doom. "Every clan, every tribe. The great Khan Morgoth has united them under a single banner for the first time in recorded history." The implication sent a chill through Lyralii's nervous system. The Krothak, whom the Eldri called Orcs in their ancient tongue, had been content to wage small-scale territorial disputes among themselves for centuries. Their brutal society thrived on conflict, but it had been internal conflict, contained within the radiation-blasted wastelands they called home. The Eldri had maintained their isolation in the crystal forests, developing their biotechnology and perfecting their harmony with Xerion's unique ecosystem. Now everything was about to change. "Sound the resonance call," Lyralii commanded. "Summon the Council of Harmonies. If Morgoth has truly united the Orc clans, then this world will know war as it never has before." As Theron melted back into the forest to carry out her orders, Lyralii gazed up at the twin moons that governed their world's complex tidal systems and electromagnetic fields. Xerion was a planet of dualities, crystal and stone, harmony and chaos, evolution and destruction. For 3 millennia, the Eldri had represented one half of that equation, while the Krothak embodied the other. Perhaps it had been naive to think such balance could last forever. In the scorched territories, where the ancient nuclear war had left the landscape twisted and deadly, Morgoth the Iron-Tusked stood atop the spire of bones, surveying his assembled armies. The massive Orc cybernetic implants gleamed against his radiation-scarred hide, a testament to the brutal technology his people had forged in the crucible of perpetual warfare. Below him stretched an ocean of green skin and crude machinery, weapons cobbled together from scavenged materials and powered by the raw nuclear energy that suffused their homeland. War machines belched radioactive smoke into the amber sky, their spiked hulls bristling with cannons, missile pods, and the severed heads of defeated enemies. "Look upon them, my brothers!" Morgotha's voice boomed across the assembly, amplified by the vox casters built into his throat. "For 3,000 years, we have fought each other while the Nightmares hide in their crystal towers, thinking themselves safe." A roar erupted from a million throats, the sound rolling across the wasteland like thunder. Morgoth raised his massive power claw, and the noise subsided to an expectant growl. "But no more! The spirits of our ancestors cry out for vengeance. The lands that were stolen from us in the time of fire will be reclaimed." He pointed toward the distant crystal forests, barely visible as a shimmer on the horizon. "The Eldri think their trees and their songs make them strong. Today, we will show them the true meaning of strength." Warchief Gorak of the Blood Axe clan stepped forward, his scarred face twisted in a permanent sneer. "Great Khan, our scouts report the tree singers have powerful weapons. Their plasma technology could—" "Silence!" Morgotha's bellows silenced even the rumble of war machines. "You speak like a coward, Gorak. Yes, they have their pretty lights and their singing trees. But we have something they have forgotten, the will to spill blood for what we believe." The Khan's red eyes swept across the assembled host, meeting the gaze of each warchief in turn. These were creatures forged by radiation and hardship, survivors of the harshest environment on Zirion. Where the elderly had achieved perfection through harmony, the Krothak had found strength through struggle. 3,000 years ago, our ancestors ruled this entire world. Morgoth continued, his voice dropping to a menacing growl that somehow carried to every ear. Before the Nifers came from the stars and brought their civilization to our sacred lands. Before the great burning that drove us to these wastelands. Morgoth's history was not entirely accurate, but truth mattered less than the fire it kindled in Orc hearts. The reality was more complex. Both species had arrived on Zirion millennia ago as refugees from different conflicts, the elderly fleeing the collapse of their stellar empire, the Krothak escaping the destruction of their homeworld. The nuclear devastation that created the scorched territories had been the result of an ancient accident, not war. But myths were more powerful than facts when it came to motivating an army. Today begins the Great Reclamation. Morgoth raised his power claw skyward, its energy field crackling with barely contained fury. We march on the crystal forests. We claim what is ours by right of blood and strength. Whack! The response was deafening, a primal scream that seemed to shake the very foundations of the planet. War machines revved their engines, weapon systems powered up with the distinctive whine of charging capacitors, and a million boots began to march in unison toward the distant forests. From orbit, the movement would have been visible as a dark stain spreading across the amber landscape, heading inexorably toward the prismatic beauty of the elderly territories. The twin moons seemed to pulse more brightly, as if responding to the violence about to unfold on the world below. The Council of Harmonies convened in the Heart Chamber, a vast organic cathedral grown from a single massive crystal that pulsed with the collective consciousness of the elderly people. Representatives from the 12 forest cities materialized as holographic projections, their forms shimmering with bioelectric energy. Lyralii stood at the center of the chamber, her silver hair flowing like liquid mercury as the crystalline walls responded to her presence. Around her, the greatest minds of her civilization debated their response to the approaching threat. We should attempt communication, urged Celendriel of the Western Groves, her projection flickering with the blue-green hues of deep forest meditation. Perhaps this Khan Morgoth can be reasoned with. Violence is antithetical to the natural order. The natural order includes predators and prey, countered Volvrus of the northern reaches, his scarred projection a reminder of past encounters with orc raiding parties. The Krothak respect only strength. They will interpret any peaceful overture as weakness. Elder Thorin, ancient even by elderly standards, raised his crystalline staff for attention. His projection was more stable than the others, a sign of his deep connection to the planet's bionetwork. I have lived through the entire piece, and I remember the time before. The orcs are driven by forces we do not fully understand, pain, anger, a spiritual disconnection from the world song. Perhaps we can heal what has been broken. With respect, Elder, Lyralii interjected. We have sensors showing 3 million armed Krothak moving toward our territories. This is not a time for healing, this is a time for survival. The chamber fell silent except for the harmonic resonance of the crystal walls. Each member of the council felt the weight of the decision before them. The elderly had spent 3 millennia perfecting their biotechnology, developing weapons and defenses that could theoretically protect them from any threat. But they had never been tested against an enemy this numerous, or this determined. Show us the tactical situation, Deloran commanded. The chamber's walls became transparent, displaying a 3-dimensional map of Zirion's primary continent. Red markers showed the orc advance, a massive wave of destruction moving steadily toward the green zones that represented elderly territories. Projected arrival times flickered above various settlements, some had hours, others had days. Their technology is crude but effective, reported Commander Erden of the Sky Guard, her projection surrounded by data streams from aerial reconnaissance. Nuclear-powered vehicles, ballistic weapons, basic energy shields. What they lack in sophistication, they make up for in sheer numbers and enthusiasm for destruction. Recommendations? Lyralii asked. Evacuation of the outer settlements, Erden replied immediately. Consolidation of our forces around the heart cities. Use our mobility advantage to conduct hit-and-run operations while we develop a longer-term strategy. That strategy being? Pressed Cylindrial. Unknown at this time. We've never faced anything like this. The admission hung in the crystalline air like a discordant note. For all their technological advancement, for all their harmony with the natural world, the elderly found themselves confronting a type of warfare they had hoped never to see again. There is another option, Lyralii said quietly. The chamber's harmonics shifted as all attention focused on her. The Sundering Protocol. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Several projections flickered as their controllers recoiled in shock. The Sundering Protocol was theoretical technology, developed in the early years after their arrival on Xerion but never tested. It would use the planet's own bionetwork to create massive geological disruptions, potentially stopping the Orc advance but at catastrophic cost to the ecosystem. Absolutely not. Dalaran's voice carried the authority of centuries. We came to this world as refugees, not conquerors. We will not destroy it to save ourselves. Then what do you propose? Lyralii's question carried an edge of desperation. We are outnumbered 30-1. Our cities are not built for siege warfare. If we cannot stop them here, they will overrun everything we have built. We fight, said Volver simply. We use our knowledge of the terrain, our superior technology, and our unity of purpose. We make them pay such a price for victory that they will question whether it was worth the cost. And if that's not enough? Then we die as we lived, in harmony with our principles. The vote was close, but in the end, the elderly chose to trust in their abilities rather than their planet's destruction. As the council dissolved and commanders raced to prepare their defenses, Lyralii remained in the heart chamber, listening to the crystal walls sing of approaching storm clouds. Outside, the first refugees from the outer settlements were already arriving, their hovering vehicles creating streams of light through the crystalline forest. Soon, the trees would sing not of harmony and growth, but of plasma fire and death. The settlement of Silverlane had been home to 12,000 elderly, a peaceful community dedicated to cultivating the rare harmony crystals that formed the backbone of their technology. Its bioorganic structures grew from the ground like elegant flowers, their translucent walls filtering the light of Xerion's dual moons into soothing patterns. All of that ended when the first Orc artillery shells began falling from the amber sky. Commander Elindra had been given 24 hours to evacuate the settlement. She managed 18 before the fastest Orc scouts reached the outer perimeter. Now she crouched behind an overturned crystal garden, her plasma rifle tracking movement through the smoke and chaos as her people fought a desperate rearguard action. "Evacuation shuttles are away," reported Sergeant Mireen, his bioarmor flickering with camouflage patterns as he slid into cover beside her. "But we've got Krothack breakthrough on the eastern approach." Through the crystalline smoke, Elindra could see them coming, green-skinned figures in crude-powered armor, wielding weapons that belched fire and death. Their war cries echoed through the settlement as they smashed through her carefully prepared defensive positions like they were made of glass. "Fall back to secondary positions," she ordered, squeezing off a series of plasma bolts that turned the lead Orc into a brief nova of blue fire. "Cover the medical evacuation." But even as she said it, she knew they wouldn't make it. The Orcs were too many, too fast, too willing to absorb casualties that would have broken any civilized force. For every Krothack that fell to elderly weapons, 3 more took his place. "Commander!" Mireen's voice was tight with controlled panic. "They're flanking us on both sides." Elindra spun to see Orc warriors emerging from the crystal groves that had once been her people's pride and joy. The beautiful structures were already beginning to blacken and die as the Orcs' radioactive presence poisoned the bionetwork that sustained them. "Signal all units," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "General retreat. We make our stand at Moonfall Ridge." As her remaining forces fell back through the dying settlement, Elindra caught glimpses of the destruction the Orcs left in their wake. Beautiful living buildings collapsed as their biomatrices failed. Harmony crystals that had taken decades to grow were smashed for the simple joy of destruction. Worse, she could see Orc scientists collecting samples, stuffing elderly technology into crude containment fields. This wasn't just conquest, it was desecration. The withdrawal to Moonfall Ridge took 6 hours, with Orc pursuit forces nipping at their heels the entire way. When Aelindra finally reached the defensive positions carved into the crystalline cliff face, she had lost half her command and all of her illusions about fighting a civilized war. "How many?" asked Major Thurin, the Ridge's commanding officer. 4,000 made it out of Silver Lane," Aelindra reported, slumping against the crystal parapet. "We held them for 18 hours. Cost them maybe 1,000 casualties. And they didn't slow down? If anything, the bloodshed seemed to excite them more." Aelindra's silver eyes were haunted by what she had witnessed. "Major, I've never seen anything like this. They're not just fighting for territory or resources. They're fighting because they enjoy it." Similar reports were coming in from across the frontier. The Orc advance was unstoppable not because their technology was superior, but because their willingness to absorb losses was beyond anything the Elderly had anticipated. Every defensive position was being overwhelmed through sheer weight of numbers and fanatical determination. "New orders from High Command," Thurin announced, his biocommunicator crackling with the strain of long-distance transmission. "All frontier positions are to conduct delaying actions only. We're pulling back to the inner ring." Aelindra looked out across the crystal plains where fires were already visible on the horizon. More settlements burning, more of her people's work being undone by Orc brutality. The twin moons seemed dimmer tonight, as if they too mourned for what was being lost. "Sir," she said quietly, "how long can we keep retreating?" Thurin's expression was grim as he watched Orc war machines appear like moving hills on the distant horizon. "Until we find something they can't break, Commander. Or until there's nothing left to defend." Morgoth stood in the ruins of Silverlane, his massive frame silhouetted against the fires that consumed the Elderly settlement. The Orc warlord's cybernetic eye whirred as it analyzed the alien architecture, recording structural weaknesses for future exploitation. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he rumbled to War Chief Gorak, who was supervising the collection of Elderly technology. "All their pretty lights and singing trees, burning like candles in the wind." Gorak looked up from a crystalline computer core his technicians were attempting to decode. "The Knifers fight better than expected, Great Khan. Their weapons are troublesome." "Good." Morgoth's tusks gleamed in the firelight. "I was beginning to worry they would be too easy to crush. A worthy enemy makes for a worthy victory." The Khan moved deeper into the settlement, his heavy boots crushing fragments of harmony crystals underfoot. Each step produced a discordant chime, as if the very ground protested his presence. Around him, Orc warriors celebrated their victory in traditional fashion, drinking, fighting, and arguing over the division of spoils. "Sir," interrupted a smaller Orc wearing the crude electronic collar of a communications specialist. "War Chief Scar reports breakthrough at 3 more settlements. Resistance is collapsing along the entire front." "Excellent. And losses?" "Approximately 12,000 dead, sir. Twice that number wounded." Another species might have recoiled at such casualties, but Morgoth merely nodded. Death was the price of glory, and the Krothack had always been willing to pay it. Besides, the rapid conquest was already bringing new recruits. Orc clans that had refused his initial call were now scrambling to join what looked like a victorious cause. "Great Khan." Gorak approached with what appeared to be an Elderly data crystal clutched in his massive fist. "My mech boys have been studying their technology. It's strange." "Strange how?" "It's alive, sir. Not just mechanical, but genuinely biological. Their weapons grow rather than being built. Their buildings think. Their computers dream." Gorak's scarred face was troubled. "It goes against everything we know about how the universe works." Morgoth's expression darkened. The Krothack had embraced mechanical augmentation out of necessity. Their radioactive environment required technology that could function in high-energy fields. But the idea of machines that lived and grew felt fundamentally wrong to his warrior's mindset. "Then we'll teach them about proper technology," he growled. "Steel and fire, crude and honest. None of this unnatural thinking machine nonsense." But even as he spoke, Morgoth found himself drawn to examine the alien artifacts his forces had recovered. There was something seductive about elderly biotechnology, a promise of power that didn't require the constant maintenance and jury-rigging that kept Orc machines functioning. Perhaps, once the Knife-Ears were defeated, some of their secrets could be adapted. "Sir!" Another messenger approached, this one bearing the scars and crude augmentations of the Red Skull clan. "War Chief Nazgob reports heavy resistance at Moonfall Ridge. The Knife-Ears have dug in deep, and our casualties are mounting." "Good," Morgoth said, surprising the messenger. "I was beginning to think this would be too easy. Order Nazgob to take the ridge, whatever the cost. And bring me their commander alive. I want to understand how they think." As his subordinates scattered to carry out his orders, Morgoth continued his exploration of the conquered settlement. In what had once been a cultural center, he found walls covered with flowing elderly script, their bioluminescent letters still glowing faintly despite the structure's death. He couldn't read the alien language, but somehow the patterns spoke to him anyway. They told of beauty and harmony, of a civilization that had spent millennia perfecting the arts of peace. They spoke of songs that could reshape matter, of crystals that held the memories of entire generations, of a unity between people and planet that his species had never known. For just a moment, Morgoth felt something that might have been regret. Then his cybernetic eye focused on a small alcove where elderly children had once learned to commune with the bionetwork. The walls were decorated with simple drawings, families of silver-skinned figures standing beneath crystal trees, their hands joined in harmony. The regret vanished, replaced by the familiar fire of righteous anger. This was exactly what was wrong with the Knife-Ears. They had turned their backs on the struggle that made life meaningful. They had chosen comfort over strength, harmony over growth. "Weakness," he spat, crushing one of the drawings under his boot. Beautiful, seductive weakness. The galaxy was full of civilizations that had chosen the easy path, that had prioritized peace over progress. Most of them were extinct now, conquered by hungrier species or destroyed by their own complacency. The elderly would join them soon enough. But first, they would learn what it meant to face a people who had never forgotten that survival required struggle, and that only through conflict could a species reach its true potential. In the strategic command center grown from the heart of a massive crystal tree, Commander Lyralii studied the holographic battlefield displays with growing desperation. Red markers showed Orc positions advancing steadily through elderly territory, while blue markers representing her own forces fell back in an increasingly disorganized retreat. "Moonfall Ridge has fallen," reported Captain Sylvain, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the strain. Major Theron's final transmission indicated they inflicted heavy casualties, but the position was overrun 6 hours ago. Lyralii closed her eyes, feeling the deaths of 2,000 soldiers ripple through the bionetwork that connected all elderly minds. Each loss was a discordant note in the planet's symphony, a piece of their collective consciousness torn away forever. "Casualties among the civilian populations?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Minimal direct losses," Sylvain replied. "The evacuation protocols have been effective." "But Commander," he hesitated, clearly struggling with his next words. "The ecological damage is extensive. The Orcs' radioactive technology is poisoning the bionetwork. We're losing entire forest sectors not to weapons, but to contamination." This was perhaps the cruelest aspect of the war. The elderly had spent 3 millennia cultivating a perfect symbiosis with Zirion's ecosystem. Their cities, their technology, even their bodies were integrated with the planet's bionetwork in ways that had taken generations to achieve. The Orcs' crude nuclear technology was like acid poured into the crystalline beauty they had created. "Military options?" Lyralii asked, though she already knew the answer. "Limited," admitted General Erden, materializing as a holographic projection from her command ship in orbit. "We can hold the inner ring for perhaps another week with conventional forces. After that," she shrugged eloquently. "After that, we consider unconventional options." The chamber fell silent except for the harmonic resonance of the crystal walls, which seemed muted and discordant compared to their usual song. Every elderly present knew what unconventional options meant: the Sundering Protocol, the planet-killing weapon that could theoretically stop the Orc advance at the cost of destroying everything they had worked to build. "There is another possibility," said a new voice from the chamber's entrance. Elder Thaloran entered with the measured steps of advanced age, his crystalline staff clicking against the organic floor. "Not the Sundering Protocol, but something almost as dangerous." "Speak," Lyralii commanded. "The deep archives contain references to weapons from the old empire, devices that our ancestors brought with them when they first came to Zirion. They were sealed away because they were deemed too dangerous for a peaceful civilization." Lyralii felt a chill run through her nervous system. The old empire had fallen precisely because it had created weapons too terrible to control. When the elderly fled to Zirion, they had deliberately left such technologies behind, choosing to build a society based on harmony rather than dominance. "What kind of weapons?" she asked. "Planet crackers. Star killers. Weapons that could reshape matter at the quantum level or tear holes in space-time itself." Thaloran's ancient eyes were haunted by memories of a more violent age. "Weapons that could certainly stop an army of orcs, but at the cost of our souls. And you think we should use them? I think we should consider all options before we allow 3 millennia of peaceful evolution to end in radioactive fire." The debate that followed was intense but brief. Time was running out, and the harsh mathematics of warfare left them with few choices. In the end, it was Lyralii who made the decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Prepare the deep archives for opening," she commanded. "But slowly, carefully. We research these weapons first, their capabilities, their risks, their long-term consequences. We don't use them unless there's no other choice." As her staff scattered to carry out the orders, Lyralii remained in the command center, watching the red markers advance steadily toward the heart of elderly civilization. Somewhere out there, an orc warlord was planning the final assault that would end her people's way of life forever. She only hoped that in fighting monsters, they wouldn't become monsters themselves. The deep archive lay beneath the oldest crystal tree on Zirion, its biomechanical locks unopened for 3,000 years. As Lyralii descended through the spiral corridors that wound around the massive root system, she felt the weight of ages pressing down upon her. The walls here were not the living crystal of modern elderly architecture, but cold metal and ceramic, the sterile technology of their ancestors' empire. Elder Thaloran moved beside her with surprising agility for his age, his crystalline staff providing both physical support and bionetwork interface. Behind them came a small team of specialists, military engineers, xenobiologists, and quantum physicists who had volunteered for what might be a suicide mission. "The locks are responding," reported Dr. Kalin, her bioscanner flickering with complex energy patterns. "But the security protocols are extensive. It's as if our ancestors really didn't want these weapons to ever be used again." "They didn't," Thaloran confirmed. "I was there when the seals were placed. The council of that era believed they were burying the tools of galactic tyranny forever." The final door was a masterwork of biomechanical engineering, its surface flowing like liquid metal while internal mechanisms hummed with barely contained energy. When it finally opened, the team found themselves facing a vast chamber filled with devices that hurt to look at directly, weapons that seemed to bend space around them or exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "By the crystal song," whispered Captain Sylvain, his scanning equipment registering energy readings that shouldn't have been possible. "How did our ancestors even create these things?" "Through 3 million years of evolutionary warfare," Thaloran replied grimly. "Each generation building more terrible weapons than the last, until we created devices that could unmake entire star systems." Lyralii approached the nearest weapon display, a device that looked like a crystalline flower but radiated an aura of wrongness that made her bio-enhanced senses recoil. According to the ancient text beside it, this was a dimensional cascade generator, a weapon that could fold space in ways that would trap entire fleets in parallel universes. "This one," she said, pointing to a different display. The weapon resembled a staff made of living metal, its surface covered with equations that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. "What does it do?" Dr. Kalin consulted her scanning equipment, then paled visibly. According to the quantum resonance patterns, it's a matter disruptor. It doesn't destroy atoms so much as convince them to stop existing. Range? Planetary scale, at minimum. Possibly system-wide if used at full power. Lyralii felt the temptation like a physical force. With such a weapon, she could end the Orc invasion instantly. Every green-skinned warrior would simply cease to exist, leaving Xerion clean and peaceful once more. But she also knew the price of such power. It would change the Elderly forever, turning them from gardeners into gods of destruction. There are safeguards, Lauren said, as if reading her thoughts. Mental barriers built into the weapons themselves. They can only be activated by someone who truly understands the consequences of their use. And what are those consequences? The end of everything we've built. The moment we use these weapons, we become the same as our ancestors, a warrior species driven by fear and the need to dominate. We lose our harmony with the bionetwork, our connection to the planet, our very souls. The chamber fell silent except for the humming of alien technologies that predated their civilization by eons. Each weapon represented a path toward ultimate power and ultimate corruption, a choice between survival and the preservation of everything that made them who they were. Commander, Dr. Kalin's voice was urgent. I'm detecting massive energy readings from the surface. The Orcs are approaching the inner ring faster than anticipated. Through the bionetwork, Lyralii could feel the terror of her people as Orc war machines approached their final strongholds. In hours, maybe less, the crystal cities would be burning just like the outer settlements. Everything beautiful and peaceful in their civilization would be ground to dust beneath Orc boots. Unless she chose to become the very thing her people had fled from millennia ago. Seal the chamber, she commanded finally. Post guards. No one enters without my direct authorization. But Commander, Sylvain began. We fight with what we are, not with what we could become, Lyralii said firmly. There has to be another way. But even as they sealed the terrible weapons away once more, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had just walked away from their only chance for salvation. Above them, the war continued, and with each passing hour, the option to remain pure became more and more academic. The siege of Luminara began at dawn, as Orc artillery opened up from positions only kilometers away from the Crystal City's outer defenses. The beautiful spires that had taken centuries to grow shook under the bombardment, their biomechanical structure absorbing punishment that would have leveled conventional buildings. Major Valdris crouched behind a crystalline barricade, watching his ammunition indicators drop steadily toward zero. His plasma rifle was running hot, its bioorganic components struggling to process the raw energy needed for continuous fire. Around him, the last defenders of the outer wall fought with the desperation of the doomed. Sir! Sergeant Mirren slid into cover beside him, her silver armor scorched by near misses. The eastern gate is failing. We need to fall back to the second ring. Through the smoke and chaos, Valdris could see Orc berserkers charging through the breach, their radiation-powered armor glowing red-hot as they absorbed defensive fire that would have killed unprotected beings. Their war cries echoed off the crystal walls, a sound of pure violence that seemed to physically assault the harmony of the bionetwork. Signal general retreat, he ordered, triggering a series of plasma charges that sent a group of Orcs tumbling back into the crater that had once been a garden. All units fall back to secondary positions. But even as his forces withdrew deeper into the city, Valdris knew they were just delaying the inevitable. The Orcs had overwhelming numbers, unlimited ammunition, and a willingness to absorb casualties that defied any rational military doctrine. Most importantly, they had something the Elderly lacked, the unshakable belief that their cause was just. Major! Captain Alindra appeared at his side, her bioarmor flickering with camouflage patterns. I've got civilians trapped in Sector 7. The bioevacuation pods aren't responding. The network's too damaged, Valdris replied, squeezing off another series of shots at the advancing Orcs. Radiation poisoning from their machines is disrupting the quantum connections. It was the same story throughout the city. The careful integration between Eldari technology and Zirian's bionetwork was becoming a liability as Orc contamination spread. Systems that had worked flawlessly for millennia were failing as the planet itself sickened from radioactive exposure. "Sir, we could try manual extraction." "No." Valdris's voice was heavy with resignation. "We can't spare the troops. The civilians will have to find their own way out." The words tasted like poison in his mouth, but military necessity demanded harsh choices. Every soldier he sent to rescue trapped civilians was one less defender holding the lines. And with Orc breakthrough imminent, those lines were all that stood between the invaders and the heart of Eldari civilization. "Fall back to the inner sanctum," he ordered. "Signal all remaining units. We make our final stand at the Crystal Heart." As his forces retreated through the dying city, Valdris caught glimpses of the destruction the Orcs left in their wake. Beautiful living buildings collapsed as their biomatrices failed. Harmony crystals that had sung for centuries fell silent as radiation poisoning disrupted their quantum resonance. Worst of all, he could see Orc mech boys setting up crude devices to harvest Eldari technology, preparing to corrupt their biotechnology for alien purposes. The Crystal Heart was a massive chamber at the city's center, its walls formed from a single enormous crystal that served as both architectural foundation and bionetwork nexus. As Valdris's remaining forces took up defensive positions, he felt the planet's pain resonating through the structure, a low, mournful note that spoke of ecosystem collapse and biological trauma. "How many?" asked Commander Lyralii, who had arrived to take personal command of the defense. 800 combat effectives, Valdris reported. "Maybe twice that number if we arm the civilian volunteers." "Against?" "Estimates suggest 50,000 Orcs within the city limits, with more arriving every hour." Lyralii's silver eyes reflected the same desperation that Valdris felt. For all their technological superiority, for all their harmony with Zirian's bionetwork, they were about to be overwhelmed by simple, brutal mathematics. "There is one option," she said quietly. "The Deep Archive." "No." Valdris's response was immediate and absolute. "We die as Eldari, not as the monsters our ancestors became. Even if it means the end of everything we've built?" Before Valdris could answer, the chambers shook as Orc explosives breached the outer walls. Through the crystal matrix, they could see green-skinned figures pouring into the sanctum like a tide of destruction. War machines followed, their crude designs somehow more terrible for their very ugliness. "For Zirian!" Valdris raised his plasma rifle and charged into the fray, his remaining soldiers following with the courage of the doomed. Behind them, Lyralii watched her civilization die in fire and blood, knowing that in her hands lay the power to save it, at the cost of everything that made it worth saving.